This is Nate speaking from the Tokenomics account, and want to be answering a few of the questions that I've received this week. Got some echo here. Great. So I had a few questions this week, and I think I'll start by recapping some of the questions that we got at the Tokenomics launch this weekend in Paris. So we were at the Token Engineering Bar Camp and had a lot of questions about token dynamics, who we are, what we do, and some questions about tokenomics and some more evergreen topics. So I think we're going to be speaking more today about the high level of tokenomics. And if any of the participants in this space have any questions about the specifics, then we're happy to answer those. And if you want to raise your hands throughout the space, we're happy to pepper those in. So thanks everyone for joining, and let's get started. I think the first question that we got this weekend was, what is tokenomics? And I want to start by delineating the study of tokenomics from the particulars of tokenomics. And I think the word tokenomics is used in two ways. It's primarily used to describe the study of the discipline of tokenomics. So tokenomics is the study of how a token's use affects its price. And there are different definitions for it, but this one is the one I resonate the most with. I think the reason for tokenomics is to create a valuable token. So any definition of the study of tokenomics should have to do with how a token gets its value. And tokens get their value through the use of tokenomic mechanisms. These are ways the token is used in a protocol which cause it to accrue value and secondarily incentivize particular behaviors of participants that wouldn't otherwise be. So that's the high level of what tokenomics is. Tokenomics are the ways in which a token is used in the protocol that cause it to accrue value. So those are kind of two functional definitions for tokenomics. And at Token Dynamics, we are designing protocols specifically looking at their tokenomics in order to accrue value, but to create a useful, valuable, and secure protocol, which includes using a useful and valuable token without compromising the security through price dependencies or things like that. And if you're just joining the space, thank you for coming in. We're talking about what tokenomics is and what tokenomics are. This was the first question that we got at Token Engineering Day. We were talking about, the title of the talk was Tokenomics for Censorship-Resistant Applications, because these types of applications where censorship resistance is the primary value proposition have additional design constraints beyond your run-of-the-mill DeFi protocol. So in addition to designing a useful, valuable, and secure protocol and token, censorship-resistant applications also need privacy and various other features and considerations worked into the protocol design in order to succeed. So first question was, what is tokenomics? And again, if you have any questions, you're in the audience, you've just joined, thank you for joining. If you have any questions, please raise your hand in the space. We'll see those and we'll be able to answer those for you in this AMA. So second question, we had a question this week about supply side versus demand side tokenomics. So I want to talk about that a little bit. We had see we have requests from the audience. Aurelio, thank you. We'll bring you up here right after this. We're going to finish answering this question about the difference between supply side and demand side tokenomics. So the supply side tokenomics is what people typically think of when they hear the word tokenomics. So if you've been in crypto for any period of time, you've seen the infamous pie chart, which has various colors and some superficial labels, which all boil down to the allocation of a token. So when most projects say, here are our tokenomics, they give a pie chart. And that pie chart has investors, advisors, team, users, community members, treasury. It has all of these different things. Ultimately, that just boils down to a cap table. So in venture capital, this cap table is the split of the equity of a company. And when most people say tokenomics, they're thinking of this. We use tokenomics, the word, to mean many things because tokenomics is made up of token and economics. Economics is made up of supply and demand. So rather than just focusing on the supply side, the reduction in supply that causes a token to increase in price through flywheels or gimmicks, we're also looking at the ways in which a token is used to generate sustainable demand by users, which will prop up the order book and create a minimum possible price for the token based on its use in the protocol through, as we've mentioned before, tokenomic mechanisms. So the difference between supply side and demand side in a nutshell is supply side focuses on reducing supply through artificial scarcity, flywheels, and gimmicks. Demand side looks at how to integrate the token in the protocol in a way that hopefully adds value to the users and is creating sustainable purchasing behavior, sustainable buy orders on exchanges in an ongoing way that's going to support the token price. So with that, we'll bring up Aurelio, who has a question for us. I'm going to be passing you the mic, and from there you can go for it and tell us your question. Everyone else, thanks for joining, and if you're interested in asking a question, feel free to raise your hand or request the mic, and we'll bring you up here. Thanks, Aurelio.
Hello, Nate. How are you? Can you hear me?
Yep, can hear you just fine. Thanks for coming.
Cool. No, thanks to you to bring this space to the community. In the past, I took the course by token engineering, and I started to design some prototypes, trying to recreate some tokens. How could I create that models? But I keep struggling with the part of the incentive mechanisms, right? Like you say, maybe supply is the easiest part of the token that you can try to control through mathematics. Maybe in demand, you have to know something about game theory to create different ways to create this necessity. But how can you link the ban with the mechanism incentive to create a sustainable model?
Yeah, thanks. So your question, if I can reiterate it just to clarify, is how can you link the supply and the demand? Like how can you link the incentives or the supply that you're offering users to the demand? Is that your question, or was it more about like the
Yes.
I think I heard. Okay. Yeah, definitely. So I think underlying this question might be the idea of like, what is the role of token incentives in a protocol? I think token engineering specifically focuses a lot on the incentives and the ways that users' behaviors can be changed. And I start from a different point entirely. I think it's it's easy to focus on what we want users to do in a protocol and think about how that might affect the token price. But I think more important is to ask the question, what do users want from a protocol? And then start there. And that's kind of the essence of supply side versus demand side as well. It's like you can think about the tokens that you're supplying to a user that are going to cause them to take a certain behavior. But if you don't consider why the user should want a token in the first place, then there's going to be no buying pressure on exchanges to match the inordinate sell pressure from those token incentives. So for example, Axie Infinity or like StepN, any of these gamified tokens like GameFi broadly from 2020 to 2022 didn't consider the demand side of a token at all. And so their protocols completely collapsed. The token price fell apart, fell down to near zero, 99% down. And that was because they weren't considering the demand. They were thinking about how do we incentivize users to purchase or to take certain behaviors that we want, and how do we attract users in the first place? And so in integrating those, you want to start by thinking about what do users want in a protocol? You can identify your user groups and say, well, we have these groups of users and maybe they want a fun game if you're in GameFi, or you have groups of users in a borrowing protocol, like a borrowing and lending protocol. And you say, well, this one user group wants to borrow things, another group wants to lend things. And to facilitate that, you might need additional groups of users. And all of those might be paid in a native token. But the question, the essential question is, what is that native token used for that causes people to want to buy it? Because without having that buying pressure, you're not going to be able to sustain the price when people want to sell after getting their token incentives. And so this is the fundamental discipline of tokenomics to me is first looking at the user groups and looking at their incentives, and then fitting a token in to any kind of mechanism that you might design based on game theory or anything else.
Cool, thank you for the answer. And could you recommend me some I don't know some documentation about your point of view? Where do you learn about tokenomics? Where can I still learning about it?
Yeah, absolutely. So the high level things we've already posted in our copy on tokenomics.xyz. And for some background and for insights, I would recommend checking out eatsleepcrypto.com, which is where I've personally been posting for the last 6 years about valuation and tokenomics. And we're going to be migrating a lot of those resources over to Token Dynamics onto our resources page, and we'll probably be reformatting the principles of tokenomics and things like that. But the demand side tokenomics framework that we have is made up of the principles of tokenomics, and you can check that and many other articles out on eatsleepcrypto.com. So all of this is what we've formulated over the last 6 years, and it's been entirely from first principles. So it's backed by data. We look at the statistical relationships between the features of protocols that have good tokenomics and their prices and their price performance in bear markets and bulls. And the rest is basically our framework that we're providing to clients. So those are the places that I would start. As far as external resources, I would also recommend Vasily Sumanov's mechanism design. He's got some pretty good ideas on the classifications of tokenomic mechanisms that you can use that cause a token to accrue value. So those are a couple resources that we would recommend in terms of learning as a token engineer how to do some of these things. And as a protocol designer or a builder, we would recommend you reach out directly to us and let us know what you're building. We would love to help you. We'd love to work with you, especially if you're in the infrastructure or privacy category of protocols, which is what we focus most of our time on.
Cool, thank you, man. I will send you a DM to get the links.
Yep, happy to provide those, and we'll drop those as a link underneath this Twitter space as well. So Aurelio, if you could send us a DM and remind us to do that, we'll do that for everyone in the space. Thanks for that question. So if anyone else has another question, feel free to raise your hand. We have a couple more listeners in the space, and beyond that, we'll start answering some more questions here. So again, we spoke this past weekend at Token Engineering Barcamp in Paris and fielded a lot of questions afterward. Some of those were on what we're doing, on the kinds of applications that we're building and working with. Token Dynamics is focused on privacy preserving and infrastructure protocols because we believe that these protocols are the ones moving the needle forward or moving the ball forward in crypto. Crypto's value proposition is censorship resistance, and we want to be supporting those protocols which provide users with censorship resistance through their protocol. So we're most interested in working with these types. So we talked about demand side tokenomics, supply side tokenomics, and we talked about what tokenomics is. As far as evaluating protocols, we do tokenomics documentation for those protocols that are interested in communicating their value proposition to users, which again the main value proposition of crypto and protocols that are based on blockchains is going to be censorship resistance. There are other features, immutability, non-repudiability, credible neutrality. These are just terms that have been thrown around in the space that point to value propositions of protocols that are not necessarily unique to crypto or to blockchains. The main one that is the ability to provide censorship resistance to users. And so we're focused on those things. When we're evaluating protocols tokenomics, we're looking for the three principles of tokenomics primarily. And so those principles are protocol utility, value capture, and economic security. So just to go through what each of those are, protocol utility is the main value proposition or the main value that is created for users or a group of users in a protocol. That's going to include things like the censorship resistant value proposition and looks at metrics like the total addressable market and the percentage of the market that your protocol is likely to capture through the value that it's creating for users. So protocol utility is the first principle of tokenomics. And when we're documenting protocols and communicating how they work to users and to investors, we're looking first at the protocol's utility, what that is, quantifying it for the investors that are going to ask these questions. And then we're moving on to the second principle. So we're looking at protocol utility, then we're looking at value capture or value accrual. This is the second principle of tokenomics, and it's distinct from protocol utility. So protocol utility is the value created by your protocol for a user or groups of users. Value capture is the value that accrues to the token based on its insertion or its use in the protocol. And it's distinct from the value created. Like your company, if you have a traditional company, can create a lot of value without capturing very much of that value. The canonical example here is Google versus the airline industry. Google's margins are something like 20%, and it gets
This space was downloaded via spacesdown.com. Visit to download your spaces today.
a few $100 billion in revenue a year. The airline industry has revenue in the trillions, but runs on 3% margins. And so as an investor, investors are looking for a return. And this includes crypto speculators, this includes venture capitalists, angel investors. They're all looking for a return on investment, and developers should be to an extent too. Developers need to pay themselves in order to fund protocol development. The risks are extremely high right now for developing censorship-resistant protocols, and there needs to be an adequate amount of value capture. So the value capture comes from these tokenomic mechanisms, and when we're documenting tokenomics for protocols, it's for them to share with their users and to share with their investors, which are two different groups. We're looking at which tokenomic mechanisms are being used and exactly how much value do those tokenomic mechanisms capture to a token. So we're first identifying what is the value prop, how great is that market, how big is that market, and then what is the percentage of value that is accrued to the token of all the value that is being created by the protocol. And this is like the core of tokenomics. We mentioned that the way that a token is used is the essence of tokenomics. So value capture is the second principle of tokenomics. The third is economic security. So economic security is distinct from technical security, where technical security connotes a lack of bugs in the code. Economic security is a lack of bugs in the incentives. So with economic security, you have to make sure that the tokenomic mechanisms that you're including are fitting for your protocol and not going to cause any kind of incentive misalignment between the groups of users that are served by your protocol's utility. So in this way, all three of the principles of tokenomics, of demand-side tokenomics, have trade-offs between them. And this is the challenge of tokenomics, is to synthesize these three principles into the same protocol to make sure that all three principles are met. And that's really difficult. It's very easy to get just two principles. It's easy to get protocol utility and value capture at the cost of economic security. So the example here is Terra. Terra was everyone knows what Terra is. Terra was an L1 that had a lot of use for the token. It integrated the Luna token wherever possible. And so it created a lot of utility for those users who were looking to use Terra. It captured a ton of value because the Luna token was collateralizing many other assets in the protocol, including UST. But because of the specific tokenomic mechanism of collateralization and where it was used and to the extent it was used, compromised the economic security of the Terra protocol. So this is an illustration of the trade-off between protocol utility and value capture to the exclusion of the third principle of tokenomics, economic security. On the next trade-off, protocol utility versus value capture, or for a protocol to have protocol utility and economic security but no value capture, it means that the token is fundamentally worthless. So the example here is Uniswap. Uniswap captures almost no value. It's processed over $1 trillion of swaps in the last 4 or 5 years since it started, and yet it's captured almost none of those. It's accrued almost none of that to the token in a fundamental way. Almost the entire Uniswap price is speculation. It's speculative value. So this is because Uniswap didn't consider how to capture value initially. They said, we're going to build a protocol and it's going to be safe because there's no counterparty risk. Uniswap's token was not used in the protocol in any way. So it was just a pure governance token that sits on top of the protocol, and they weren't able to capture any value to that token. So it was very easy for them to get protocol utility and economic security, but hard for them to get value capture. And they didn't capture value creatively. And I will talk about how value can be captured creatively today. I think that's probably going to be a follow-up question here. The third trade-off, just to illustrate this, is where a protocol might have economic security and value capture, but very little protocol utility. So these types of protocols are address a very small total addressable market. And that's, again, one of those metrics that investors look for when they're looking to fund a protocol. So an example of this would be like iExec, ticker is RLC. It is verifiable distributed computing, and that market size is relatively small. So that's an example of where a protocol might have value capture and economic security. There's no compromising the protocol based on the mechanisms used in the token, but it's lacking in utility. So that was some of the things that we talked about this weekend when we were discussing tokenomics, and a lot of the questions were follow-ups to that. If anyone has a question at this point, feel free to chime in and raise your hand. Welcome for any follow-ups, and if not, we'll just keep going with some of the questions that we fielded throughout the week. I think one thing I wanted to talk about that's been on my mind for a bit, and a question that I fielded in person, is like, what is crypto actually doing? Like, what is crypto for? And I got this question from a normie, and I think this is a really good question. It gives us insight into how the normies are thinking. It's like, what is crypto really for? Because over the last 10 years, we've seen mostly speculative applications. There's been mostly this shitcoin casino that spikes every 4 years, and at the end of it, we have maybe a couple cool applications for ourselves, but ultimately the biggest hits have been things that have fueled that casino every 4 years. And so with Token Dynamics, we're focused on building applications that are going to eventually be used by the broader public, but solve a real need for crypto, or for the kinds of people that want to be living in the crypto ecosystem on crypto. I really think we should be using our own applications and eating our own dog food, so to speak, before we try to push this stuff out to the masses as some kind of get-rich-quick scheme. And I'm sure everyone listening to this is already on this same page, but I think it deserves reiterating because we are now at the point where people are asking why crypto exists. The masses are saying, I don't understand this stuff, but it seems to just be a way to throw your money in and maybe get more out. And that's totally different than the original mission of crypto. Bitcoin was created to be a peer-to-peer electronic cash system, not some digital shiny rock. It was supposed to be a medium of exchange, and that's because a peer-to-peer electronic cash system would enable two people to interact without the buy-in of trusted third parties. That is a huge, huge need in the world right now. And we're getting to a point where governments have been more oppressive, corporations have been spying on citizens and passing that info to state actors who are trying to steer the course of elections and change our, what we're able to do and change our patterns of movement, prevent us from acting freely. And crypto was initially created to take that power away and to solve these problems. So I think right now we're at a point where we can actually start to say crypto is about censorship resistance. And that's why at Token Dynamics we're focusing on building censorship resistant applications that are built to last. Our tagline is build for the next century, not the next cycle. I think too many people have been focused on what the next cycle looks like and what people are going to purchase and what they're interested in buying. What's the next narrative? We need to be focused on what applications need to be built for this technology to bring the freedom that it can to the world. So when we're designing things, we're designing with censorship resistance as our first priority. And it just so happens that in order for things to be censorship resistant, they have to be useful to a lot of people. They have to have a real value proposition. That's utility, protocol utility. They also have to accrue value to compensate the participants of the protocol, to compensate the developers, especially who are taking enormous risks by putting out censorship-resistant applications. We saw Alexei being arrested last year for Tornado Cash. We've seen other developers being threatened or put in dangerous situations. There are people that I know personally that have received complaints from various government agencies and essentially cease and desists on the types of innovation that they're creating. And these are things that are serious problems that are solved when we capture value, when we create valuable applications with real tokens that have a use in the protocol. But it starts with creating a valuable product and capturing some of that value. We absolutely have to do that for crypto to succeed. And then the third point to building censorship applications is economic security, making sure that the incentives are aligned. This is also called incentive compatibility, making sure the incentives of a protocol are aligned so that it's not going to collapse for being exploited by, at the highest threat level, somebody who's profit oriented. If there is a profitable attack, we can expect that through flash loans or through investment or some other means, someone will exploit a protocol. We've seen that with Terra. We've seen that with Mango Markets, with Aave, with UkiDAO, with Fei. We've seen this with so many protocols in the last year, and there keep being more. They keep appearing. Economic security exploits, I think, are going to make up a large minority, if not a majority, of exploits in the next 2 years. And so we have to make sure for our censorship-resistant applications that they're free of economic security attacks, free of economic security exploits. And the fourth point for censorship-resistant applications that we were presenting this weekend is these need to have privacy at each layer. And so given that economic security is inherited between a protocol's dependencies, we need to include privacy at every layer of the stacks that we're building on. That might mean forking Ethereum and turning it in, or including Ethereum, not necessarily forking away from Ethereum, but forking the Ethereum protocol with a hard fork to include privacy at the base layer. That's a narrative that should be being pushed right now. It also means having privacy for developers, which means letting developers launch in their protocols in its final form. Satoshi was able to be anonymous and to post Bitcoin to the Cypherpunk mailing list because he had already created it. He already had, actually, I guess, Satoshi posted it in October. It launched in January. But the idea is Satoshi needed extreme OPSEC, and one of the ways that we can provide developers with OPSEC is to have protocols launching anonymously. So we need some infrastructure for that, and that's something that we're sort of working on internally. But privacy is integral to every layer of the stack. It's integral to the base layer where the validators aren't going to be censored for processing censorship-resistant applications like Tornado Cash. It's integral to the developers. It's integral to the users. We've seen an enormous drop-off in use of Tornado Cash because Tornado Cash is not private at every layer. So this is the fourth point of developing censorship-resistant applications is privacy. We need all four of these things in order to develop these kinds of apps. And these are the kinds of apps that are really going to take crypto forward, that are going to move the industry forward in the way that it's been supposed to go, the way that it's supposed to have gone this entire time. I think we've lost sight of the original intent of crypto as to provide censorship resistance for users. We've gotten into our shitcoin casino that's been fueled by various venture capital firms who aren't aligned with these values. And so now it's time for us to start building things that people who need censorship resistance can use. So I see a couple more people have joined the space. If any of you have questions, I'd be happy to answer those. We've talked about what tokenomics is, the difference between demand side and supply side tokenomics. We've talked about how to design protocols for censorship resistance, which includes the principles of tokenomics and adding privacy in at various layers. See a few people in here, gone for about 30 minutes now, and I'd love to answer some more questions if you have them. If not, we'll probably close this out in the next couple minutes, keeping this one brief. But we will be doing these every week until further notice. And if you have questions, you can find whichever thread it is that we've got posted for the week on our Twitter, and we're happy to answer those. Priority is going to go to those people that ask questions in advance, especially as we start to fill up in the future. Great. We do have one question posted on the Twitter. Thanks for commenting here. Question from Insomniac is, what's the right value capture for privacy protocols without compromising conflicts of interest? That is a great question. So I think I could see a couple ways to interpret this, and I'll try to answer it from all angles. The right value capture for privacy protocols without compromising conflicts of interest. Yeah. So, okay, I'll try to answer this superficially and directly. So I think when you're capturing some value in a privacy protocol, you want to be thinking about ways that your users can use the protocol without being incentivized necessarily to have to stay in the protocol. And that will mean capturing value on the way in to a privacy protocol rather than capturing value on the way out. So that's maybe a concrete thing to consider. If a user is forced to pay on the way out, then they might want to keep their money in a privacy protocol longer, and that would be like a little bit worse of a user experience. Also, if there are any risks to staying in the protocol, like smart contract risk, then it might be a precarious situation. So that's like maybe one thing. I'm not sure exactly what you're considering for your privacy protocol, but that might be one helpful pointer on how to think about this and some ways that we've seen protocols do things differently. On the other hand, if it benefits your users to have more TVL locked in the protocol because of a greater anonymity set, then it might be good to capture value on the way out, so that you're incentivizing people to play around inside the protocol and then have their cut taken out when they want to withdraw. So these are ultimately trade-offs. These are trade-offs between the utility, the total utility provided to all your users, and the total value captured from your users of that value that you're providing them. And so on a, I guess to answer that question maybe in another way, what is the right value capture for privacy protocols without compromising conflicts of interest? I think the tokenomic mechanisms that you use are going to affect the amount of value captured. So different tokenomic mechanisms capture different amounts of value. For example, using your token to pay fees in the protocol, like as a medium of exchange for the fees you might charge, is going to capture relatively little value because the fees that you're charging are only going to be a fraction of the value that is flowing through your protocol. And of that, each token might be used more than one time in a given time period to pay for those fees. So that's going to capture relatively little value to your token, or accrue relatively little value to your token. Again, value accrual and value capture are basically the same thing. Value capture sounds more like it's taking value out of the protocol, but it's actually can just be accrued to the token and held by users in a similar way that a stock accrues value for what it represents, the ownership over the assets of a company. And then, for a contrasting tokenomic mechanism, if for some reason you're using a mechanism like collateral, where your token is collateralizing things, I don't imagine this would be a particularly good fit for a privacy protocol, but there might be some creative ways to work it in. Actually, as I'm saying that, I can think of some great ways to work it in. But collateralization is going to accrue a lot more value to a protocol than something like use as a medium of exchange purely for fees in a protocol. These are two tokenomic mechanisms on the extremes of the spectrum of the hierarchy of value capture, which is an article you can check out on eatsleepcrypto.com to give you some more ideas about tokenomic mechanisms. That one will probably be up for another couple weeks before we cannibalize that and turn it into something for Token Dynamics. But you'll be able to find those resources and similar resources on the resource page of Token Dynamics in the next couple of days as we release more of them. But hopefully that gives you an idea of some mechanisms that you can use to capture value. I think for privacy protocols, as far as like conflicts of interest, you definitely want to align the use of your protocol and the interests of your protocol with your users' interests. And so if you're thinking about how to do that specifically and also how to compensate yourself, I would definitely be interested to speak with you, and that's something you could reach out to us about. Currently, we're migrating from just our hosting to Skiff, which is a more privacy-preserving email server. And if you have any, if you need to be private in your particular means of communication, you can reach out to me at nate@eatsleepcrypto.com. It's a Tutanota email server, and that's going to be the best way for us to have private communication. And then in the near future, it'll be some tokendynamics.xyz email through Skiff. And if you're interested, if your threat model includes Twitter, feel free to send us a message on Twitter, and then we can move from there. But yeah, if you're developing any kind of privacy preserving protocol, we'd love to help you with value capture to make sure that you're able to compensate yourself for all the work that you're doing, and fight off the mitigate all of the risks that you might have in doing that. Well, thank you all for coming, and we're looking forward to seeing you next week. We're going to be doing these AMAs once a week and addressing everyone's questions about tokenomics. Hopefully, we answered all of your questions today, and if not, please post a question in the comments, or if you weren't able to make it to this one, we hope to see you in the next one. Thanks so much, everyone. Really appreciate you being here and looking forward to talking to you again.